Well, hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us this morning. My name is Laura Bishop, and I have the honor of serving as Commissioner of the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. It's also my honor to be joined here today by Mark Culda, who's the Vice President of the Insurance Federation of Minnesota, Sarah Hannigan, General Manager for Whole Foods Co-op in Duluth, Cheryl Hills, who's the Executive Director for Region 5 Development Commission, Mayor Chris Etzler of Staples, and Mayor Emily Larson of Duluth. We're also very honored to have State Senator Jen McKeown with us today, too. We are all here today because we share a common goal of seeing Minnesota's communities grow and thrive. And we recognize that our changing climate and increasing extreme weather presents new challenges for our towns and cities and counties, and the cost of inaction is simply too high for our communities to bear. Today in Minnesota, we are seeing trends and three major trends across the state due to climate change. First, Minnesota is becoming warmer. Second, our state is becoming wetter, as demonstrated as today. And third, we're experiencing more frequent and more intense extreme precipitation events or mega rains. In fact, these mega rain events are now 4 times more likely than they were just a generation ago. And in the last 10 years, we've seen mega rains in communities including Willmar, Brainerd, and Duluth. Extreme storms are a risk to public safety. They damage public infrastructure, and they can have devastating effects and result in costly cleanups for families, homes, and businesses. And you'll hear more about this morning. Unfortunately, Minnesota's communities are increasingly unprepared for these challenges. In particular, our water infrastructure, including our stormwater systems, sewers, and wastewater treatment plants, are aging and becoming obsolete. Some of Minnesota's oldest cities have systems that date all the way back to the 1880s. Add weather that's wet like today and more frequent and extreme rainfalls, and you have an even bigger problem. In too many cases, our aging and inadequate water infrastructure can't handle this influx, resulting in flooded streets, sewers backing up into homes and businesses, millions of dollars in damages to public and private property, and wastewater overflows that release partially treated wastewater. In the last 2 years, communities in north, central, and northeastern Minnesota have experienced 24 of these wastewater overflows because of increasingly wet weather. We can help Minnesota's communities adapt to our changing climate and more extreme weather by supporting their efforts to prepare, plan, and invest in crucial water infrastructure improvements. Governor Walz is proposing a $2.9 million investment over the next 2 years to help more communities do this important work. This new funding would enable the MPCA to provide grants to our local communities and local governments and tribal nations for climate resiliency planning. This includes assessing local infrastructure risks and vulnerabilities, developing climate community plans that increase climate resilience, and planning and pre-design work that's needed to improve and better manage stormwater and wastewater infrastructure. Our goal is to help develop shovel-ready projects by arming them with the plans and engineering pre-work that's needed to secure additional future funding. Data from the Federal Emergency Management Administration, FEMA, shows that for every dollar of investment in resilient infrastructure, $6 of benefit accrue to communities from avoided loss due to extreme precipitation, flooding, and other disasters. So we can be confident in the return on investment for these types of projects. With this grant program, MPCA could assist up to 15 communities each year. But we know that demand is so much higher than that, and more resources are needed to make sure that every community can afford the necessary preparations. This proposal represents a starting point and just one component of a larger framework of investments needed to help Minnesota jobs grow, help our communities adapt to changing climate, and increase resiliency. Minnesota can't do this alone either. The MPCA is strategically working with other state, regional, and federal partners to find resources to accelerate both the planning and implementation of this critical work. We are committed to continuing with partners at all levels to raise awareness and resources for this effort, because we know that the cost of inaction is even greater. With that, I'd like to turn it over to our next speaker, Mark Culda of the Insurance Federation of Minnesota. Mark?
Thank you, Commissioner. We really appreciate the opportunity to present some information to this important group. And really our focus is not necessarily the why of what is happening, but we can certainly explain in great detail because we have numbers to call out the what is happening. And the what is happening is clearly the state is seeing a larger number of extreme weather events. And so when you look back at the history, our past history is one really of stability. For decades, we had weather stability. And then in 1998, things changed. We had 3 significant storm outbreaks that year on March 29th, May 15th, and most importantly, on May 30th of 1998. That was something called the Southern Great Lakes Derecho. It started in Minnesota and spread eastward. But that storm in Minnesota cost $900 million in insured losses. And those 3 storm outbreaks in 1998 cost a total of $1.5 billion in insured losses. And the reason why that number is significant is because that $1.5 billion in losses is more than the previous 40 years combined. So we had decades of stability, and then all of a sudden in 1998, we had a $1.5 billion loss that year, and it's continued. Since 1998, there have now been 26 $1 billion losses in Minnesota or more. And so things change dramatically and pretty suddenly. We're seeing more extreme weather. We're seeing more storms, stronger storms, more severe storms, larger storm outbreaks. And so it's costing Minnesota consumers money. And we look at the recent catastrophe history, 2010 in Minnesota, we had 144 recorded tornado touchdowns. That's more than any other state. We led the nation in tornado touchdowns in 2010. In 2011, we had a strong storm in North Minneapolis that cost about $250 million. But also in 2011, on July 1st, a very strong storm hit southwest Minnesota. It didn't hit many major populated areas, so in terms of dollar damage, it wasn't significant. But on that day, there was a 90-mile-per-hour recorded wind gust for a sustained period at the Olivia Airport. And when you look at the data, 90 miles an hour over a sustained period, that's the equivalent of a Category 2 hurricane. So here we go, decades without severe weather, and then on July 1st, 2011, we had a Category 2 hurricane hit southwest Minnesota. So clearly things have changed. If you skip ahead to 2017, on July 11, 2017, we had what seemed like a pretty small storm. It was a half-an-hour hailstorm that hit the Twin Cities metro area, the suburbs of Brooklyn Park and Coon Rapids. Seemingly a small storm. It was only half an hour. Nobody was injured, but there was a very significant insurance claims event. That storm cost a total of $3.2 billion. It was the most expensive storm in state history, and that storm was the 10th most expensive storm in the world that year. So here we go from decades of minor weather events to the point where we're now seeing world trend-setting storm events in Minnesota, and it's costing consumers. When you go back to 1998, the average homeowner's insurance premium was $368 a year. Now it's almost $1,400 a year. It's a 366% increase in those 20 years. We've gone from a state where when we were $368, we were in the bottom third. We were 36th in the country for the most expensive homeowners insurance. Now we're a few dollars away from being a top 10 state. So we've gone from a bottom third state to almost a top 10 state in only 20 years. And it's something that consumers need to know about. And we just need to be aware that these storms are hitting with more frequency. They're more severe, and it's costing us insurance premiums. So thanks for the opportunity to give you some of our information, and I'll certainly stick around for any questions that you may have.
Thanks, Mark. Next up, we have Sarah Hannigan.
Thank you for the opportunity to share a business perspective. One of our grocery stores is located in the Hillside neighborhood in Duluth, and during the 2012 flood, an antiquated culvert that runs beneath our parking lot failed. The rusted out corrugated metal was no match for the extreme rain and runoff. And when the culvert failed, everything around it did as well. Within a few seconds, a 25-foot retaining wall burst and about 30% of our parking lot collapsed, all washing downstream toward Lake Superior. Our building was spared, but operations and our ability to provide essential services was disrupted for months. Our receiving dock, which is immediately adjacent to the collapsed retaining wall, was inaccessible. And for 2 months, all inventory had to be unpacked from pallets and hand-trucked through our front door, one box at a time. For almost 5 months, customer parking was reduced by over 60%. And during delivery times, the precious parking had to be vacated to accommodate the delivery vehicles. The failed water infrastructure also added over $350,000 in unexpected expense for our business that year. Ultimately, our business recovered, but we know there will be more extreme weather ahead. Preparing for the impacts of our changing climate is critical, and I'm really grateful for the opportunity to share our experience and show our support for this important investment. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. Next up, we have Mayor Etzler from Staples.
Well, good morning, and thank you, Commissioner Bishop, and thanks to the MPCA for bringing this proposal forward. You know, it's kind of progressive thinking like this that makes me proud to be a small town Minnesota mayor. But this type of planning program is really essential for rural communities to prepare local individual approaches that address these extreme weather needs or infrastructure needs. You know, it's particularly in small communities. The cost of any type of planning project is prohibitive. Many small communities are typically, you know, we're rural, we're conservative, and we often struggle providing just the basic services. You know, and I look at, you know, my city, for example, you know, if we were to say, let's fund you know, the community want to fund a plan that, you know, a $20,000 plan, that represents about 2% of my tax levy. 2% may not sound like a whole lot, but when we look at just the annual increases of doing business as a community, it's pretty tough to hold the line the way it is. And, you know, that's really what our constituents are asking us to do is hold that line as elected officials. So with that said, really, you know, I just look at the whole planning piece and, you know, the importance of planning and effective planning. You know, really, it can break that cycle of that damage, you know, the repair, the reconstruction, that damage again, and then the reconstruction. You know, with effective planning, we just become more proactive and more, you know, instead of being reactionary. I look at the issues that we've had in our community over the years, and that's really what we're doing, was just we're reacting to it. We haven't been proactive. Again, with effective planning, we can build those relationships with our counties and our cities and our area communities to work on some of these programs. And it's been mentioned before too, with effective planning, as far as the ability more likely to be successful in future infrastructure dollars. And if anything else, the planning can just provide awareness and education. So I guess in closing, you know, this effective planning only comes to us in our small rural communities through programs like this. So I want to thank you, Commissioner Bishop, and the MPCA and Governor Walz for bringing this forward.
Great, thank you. Mayor, for joining us today as well. So I think we're moving on to Mayor Larson.
We're going to jump to Cheryl Hills next.
Oh, we are. Sorry, Mayor Larson. We're jumping to Cheryl Hill. Good. Thank you very much.
Sorry, Mayor Larson. Cheryl Hills, Region 5 Development Commission. Thank you, Commissioner Bishop. Just drifting a little bit off of what Chris was saying, that we are really in support of this approach. We know that relationships between local planning organizations like ours, which exist across the entire state, and folks like the MPCA can really serve those small rural communities that are often, as Chris said, under-resourced. And he's a town of 2,500 or so. Think of those towns that are 250 and 300 that are definitely even more at a disadvantage of being able to find resources to do this kind of planning. So to create locally designed solutions that are really come from constituents and local community members is important. We want to leverage this state support with federal investments, which we know how to do really well in Minnesota, frankly. So that's an advantage of instituting programs like this. We want to do those projects that mitigate those impacts of the extreme weather. In my opinion, and just briefly, I'll share with you, I think this is a real community preventative care at its best. And we think about how we know how preventative care helps us as individuals. Well, this is that ounce that we need for communities at large. So thank you for that. And now we'll move on, I guess. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Cheryl. We're going to go to Mayor Emily Larson from the City of Duluth.
Hi, good morning, everybody. It is a real pleasure to be here. Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, MPCA. Thank you to everybody for the opportunity to speak to why addressing climate and water infrastructure is paramount to the sustainability of communities. In the City of Duluth, within the last 10 years, we have had 5 incredibly catastrophic storms, including the 2012 flood, which Sarah spoke to from the Whole Foods Co-op perspective. We have also had 4 additional storms that have caused incredible amounts of damage, 6 overflows on Park Point alone during 2019. Our city crews have since gone down and addressed the pipes in the system there. We've had no overflow since. But the high water table of Lake Superior is, we believe, related to climate. And what we are seeing is record high levels. In 2019, it was the highest that the water table had been since 1940. So that is like 80 years of data that's been collected, and the impacts of what we see. It's not just on the singular business. It's not just on a singular resident. It is on neighborhoods. It is on communities. It is costly. Here in the city, we are used to weather. We love to talk about it. We love to take photos of it, but it is really catastrophic what we have experienced many, many times. And what we know is that it takes a tremendous amount of effort to recover. And the reality is that with this kind of funding, this kind of intentional planning and collaborative future thinking that could be available through this funding, what happens is that we're actually thinking forward. And if, as a mayor, if you're not thinking forward, you're falling back. It is so difficult to just simply react to all of these storms, to all of the infrastructure needs, to all of the water infrastructure needs. It's expensive, it's time consuming, it's scary for residents. What we strive to do as mayors, and I'm sure our Staples mayor would agree, is to provide the basics upon which people can build their lives. And we can't control climate, and we can't control weather, but we can control our reaction to it, and we can be mindful and thoughtful in how we think ahead. So I'm really grateful to the MPCA and the governor for the thinking around this and how you are approaching it. Many people know the City of Duluth through the Lake Walk. We are also, of course, an international seaport. We are a regional center, 86,000 residents, but 6.7 million tourists, 35,000 daily commuters. So when we have an infrastructure issue here in the city, the ripple effect is significant. It is not just inconvenient. It really throws the entire regional economy out of whack. So we also have had hurricane force winds down on our lake walk. What happens then is not only does the infrastructure get flooded, as I described on Park Point, but businesses close. People literally can't get home. They can't get to loved ones. They can't see what's going on. And it shores up because we're on a hill, of course. You're literally shoring a seawall that holds the rest of the city together. So I will talk about climate and resiliency any chance that I can and we can to help lift up the need for additional funding and supports like this. Thank you, Commissioner, for your vision to ensure that communities across the state, inclusive of all sizes, have an opportunity for real local solutions. That really is the key. We know our communities, we know what we need. We've got skills, talents, and we just need some time and money to come up with the best solutions for ourselves. So thank you for having me, and really appreciate the opportunity to lift this issue up.
Thanks, Mayor Larson. And last but not least, we're going to go to State Senator Jennifer McEwen.
Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for having all of us today to talk about this. Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, MPCA. It's been great to join all of you and to hear the remarks that have been made so far. You know, when I think about this issue, I think about having grown up in Duluth, and as Mayor Larson said so beautifully, in Duluth, we love the weather. We watch the weather, we watch the lake. We're always aware of the changing weather, and we really eat it up. We love it. But also, ever since I've grown up, scientists have been telling us. I remember in elementary school in the 80s hearing that we needed to take action on climate change, that climate change was happening and it was going to be a crisis and we needed to start acting. And it's been decades. I'm in my 40s now. And we put a lot of this work off for most of my life. So, what we're looking at is truly an existential crisis that, as many people have said, is truly intersectional. It's going to affect every area of our lives, our economy, our health, the natural environment, obviously, but it will be something that affects all areas of our life. And it is something that we should have been planning for a long time. We've had to deal with decades of purposeful misinformation put out by the fossil fuel industry and are trying now to make up for lost time. So I just want to lend my support for this very modest proposal for planning. I mean, this is exactly the kind of thing that we should have been doing probably about 20 years ago, but we need to do it immediately. It needs to be done with urgency now, and I'm very glad to see that we're moving in this direction. Let's do this, and let's do more of this, because we have some tough years ahead of us with the climate crisis. It is really going to be revving up in the next decade or two, and now is the time for us to assist our smaller towns, the smaller communities, especially with those needs, to make plans now for how they're going to protect their infrastructure, how they're going to mobilize their communities to protect their local economies and the public health as well. So let's do this. I applaud the MPCA for moving forward in this direction, and I'm glad to lend my support. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Senator, and thank you all of our participants this morning. With that, we'll open it up for questions from members of the media. Again, raise your hand virtually and we'll call on you. Otherwise, you can try to put it in the chat box as well, and we'll go through those questions. First one I see here is Kendall.
Hey, good morning, guys. Whenever it comes to climate resiliency planning, if a community receives the grant to do that, is it the local government planning in partnership with MPCA, or how does that relationship work?
So I can start to answer that, and then Katrina Kessler, our Assistant Commissioner for Water Policy, is on the line as well. But really with guidance from the MPCA, but we're expecting that these grants would allow them to, local communities, to build out their plans Katrina, would you like to add anything more to that? I mean, it could be go to hiring a consultant, others that can help them with that technical expertise.
Yeah, thanks, Commissioner, and thanks for the question. And I think what you've heard from the mayors and the people on the call today really demonstrates that we want to develop a program that can be tailored to local needs. We understand that local communities are really where the brunt of this is being felt, and that they are best suited, as you heard Mayor Larson say, to identify what is needed. And that the money that is included in the grants, Commissioner noted, could be used to hire a consultant. There's differing capacities around the state within municipal governments to do engineering and modeling and develop prioritization and planning. And certainly where people have capacity and they've already started this work, these grants could be used to accelerate and make this move faster. And in other instances, this could be just the catalyst to work with a facilitator or a consultant, certainly with technical assistance from the MPCA to get this critical work started.
Thank you.
Next, I have Mark Anderson. Mark.
Yeah, that's good to follow up. I'd like to ask Chris Etzler. I know Staples is building a new wastewater treatment plant. So how much planning for extreme weather events did went into those plans? Because this is just in the last couple of years.
You know, that's a good question, Mark. You know, and I think, you know, when it comes to the wastewater, that plant, I think there was, you know, the capacity piece, you know, was considered. You know, one thing that we've had in our community, some of the issues that we've had were taken care of. You know, fortunately for us, with some highway reconstruction, that really took care of a major issue that we had. But we still have some issues, and I know that those were considered in the plans of that facility. And that was, you know, again, that was done with our engineering team that did that. But you know, this is there's still a lot of those issues that we have in our community that wastewater treatment plant isn't the place that we will be resolving those.
Okay.
I'll just add on to that, because we have really seen some amazing work throughout the state in building wastewater treatment plants that are building for not just the 100-year event, but the 400-year event. So Detroit Lakes is a great example right now of how they have partnered with both state and federal resources as well. So we are seeing, and the need is demonstrated, and the capacity levels that Staples is building for, but also that we've seen other communities build for, is really needed and impressive. But these investments for the long term are what's needed.
We have a couple of questions here in the chat as well. The first one is from Rebecca Mitchell. This one's directed to Mayor Etzler. What are some of the issues facing Staples related to weather events in recent years? And what are the planning projects possible this grant could go towards in Staples?
You know, again, when I heard Mr. Culda, you know, speak about those weather events, you know, we've seen those too. We've had about 5 years ago in 15, we had a small tornado that went through our recreation area that took out our softball complex and that. And so that's one that we're working on right now. But we've also had in our, and here's kind of the interesting thing too, Staples, and I hate to say this, but we're basically built on a swamp. And so our water issues that we have, it can be great, and we need that infrastructure within our community. We still have some pieces of our community that go back their late 30s and early 40s, and those are the areas, and they're surrounding our high school. And actually right now, next week, April 13th, I think it is, we're voting on a referendum as far as our high school too. So we are actually talking with the school on, you know, how, if this happens, how we're going to redo that area, because it's important. We've had classrooms, rain events where classrooms flood. And so that's an area over there that we're currently looking at. And there we also we fixed an area. When we talk about the reactionary, we had an area that flooded. It didn't take much rain, and it flooded every time. And it's fixed right now, but I think it's kind of a little bit of a Band-Aid. And we've had, I remember, I think Mark Anderson is on here with our local newspaper, published some photos, or at least going back into the 40s and 50s of that neighborhood flooding. So we kind of put a Band-Aid on that about a couple of years ago, but we really need to look at that because that's real close to our downtown. Again, not too far from the school. So those are some things I think that how we could use this, because again, for us to fund, the taxpayers to fund that is just, it's hard to ask our taxpayers to fund a planning piece. So.
Mayor Larson, I think you have your hand up. Did you want to jump in here?
Mayor, you're on mute.
Thank you. Now it's in official virtual for us guys. Thank you for letting me jump in. Yes, really what I wanted to say is that one of the things that is possible with this kind of planning grant, and I was listening to the mayor of Staples, I was listening to Chris speak a little bit, is the idea of how we can anticipate the relationships that need to be built for people to survive and thrive, specifically around issues of fairness, justice, and equity. It is really devastating when a school has to shut immediately, when a neighborhood is cut off from the community, when people are displaced because of infrastructure issues that relate to climate. And that is not the best time to put together the synapses and connections to ensure that all the right partners are at the table, and the right partners aren't always the ones with the titles. The right partners are neighborhood leaders, community advocates, activists, really getting people on board who can help coalesce around a vision and make sure that we're moving forward smarter, but also as collaboratively as possible. It is really hard to do that when you're reacting, and that intention needs to be built ahead of time. And to me, that's part of what the power of these grants would be, at least for the City of Duluth. I can't speak to Staples or other places, but it's not just about, mechanically thinking through how we would start approaching that. It's building that kind of strong fabric of relationships that will hold the water, literally kind of hold communities together as they're struggling. So to me, there's a lot of value in that. And there's just knowing that the state recognizes that planning is needed for that. I know those values fit well within the Walz-Flanagan administration. And I think that's likely part of the root of these planning grants, is to make sure that people aren't just reacting and getting left behind, but that as we're talking about climate justice or resiliency, that we're including everybody. Everybody deserves to survive and thrive and to experience resilience. And that's some of what thinking ahead would allow us to do.
Thank you, Mayor Larson. Cheryl, I think you had your hand up too. Maybe you want to jump in here.
Yeah, thank you. I think there's some good questions in the chat about what kinds of projects, how would you utilize this to leverage funding, federal funding, what kinds of federal funding would you access? And I think that's part of the idea here, guys, is that too, what Mayor Larson was saying is that bringing folks together from local communities who understand the issues and how things are flooding, or how straight line winds can impact commerce and impact communities and schools. And getting that local perspective in the plan, but then bringing in, that's what these planning grants allow, is bringing in those experts, those engineers who say, here are the innovative new technology kinds of solutions that can mitigate from those kinds of disasters. So for us to say, hey, we would do culverts here, or we would do this here, or we would, right? That's really premature to understanding where are the prioritized problems for the community from the perspectives of the local community residents, and then bringing in those folks with the knowledge base to help us understand what kinds of technology that we can use to mitigate from those kinds of issues. So it's not as easy as, say, in Brainerd, you've had straight line winds that have impacted your economy to millions of dollars. And this is what you should do. It's really to understand what are all of the possibilities, what has the greatest economic impact for the leveraged dollars that we're using in terms of taxpayer dollars that have the highest environmental benefit, right? That's the really difficult task when you're doing this kind of planning, is balancing the use of public funds with environmental benefit, maximizing both. That's why this planning is important. It's not easy.
Great, thanks, Cheryl. We have a question here from the Duluth News Tribune. I think Mayor Larson, I think it's for you. What types of projects would the city of Duluth have on its to-do list if this funding were to move forward for the planning perspective, and then how will the city seek the dollars for those projects?
Thank you for the question. Good morning. I think that's probably Peter who asked it. So good morning, Peter. So some of what I spoke to and kind of jumped in earlier, I think we would do a lot of engagement with stakeholders. And, you know, stakeholders is kind of an overused term. So people who are significantly impacted by climate, to find out not just how, you know, what are the important projects to them, but how do we create a fabric of resiliency that is inclusive of all neighborhoods and all zip codes. I think, as you know, we also, as a city, have really prioritized sustainability, energy reduction, and everything that falls within that really big bucket. So we do have a sustainability coordinator at the City of Duluth named Mindy Granley. And so certainly we would go through kind of the matrix of what she has for the priorities. And priorities for us are based on urgent, you know, physical crises that we could see or experience. It's based on where the funding is that would help augment that. For instance, as we're going through already the stimulus bill that just was announced, you know, within the last 10 days, true guidance won't come out formally on that money for up to 60 days, but we are already scouring it to see, okay, what are the possibilities going to be, whether it is in the realm of sustainability and energy or something else. So I think for part of what I would do, quite frankly, Peter, is sit down with Mindy, our energy plan commission, and say, how do you envision prioritizing this to get, you know, to extend our mission and our vision as far as possible. I think, as you know, we're already working really intensively on the lake walk, on the seawall, on fortifying the seawall. We call ourselves a coastal city because of the water experiences that we've had. We've done significant work as it relates to stormwater. We've done significant work as it related to past sewage overflow. So now some of what we're doing is really rebuilding some of the mechanisms that we have. For instance, we're rebuilding the lake walk, not just with, you know, paving that's being put down over and over again, but in an internal break wall, significant engineering that's very different. Ideally, it won't look a whole lot different in some parts to people, but the structural components of it have been built with resiliency in mind. We're certainly seeing, and there's been a lot of news lately about Park Point and the dredging and the sand and what we can do to kind of fortify that coast. There may be things that this planning grant could be helpful for as we're working to coordinate with the Coast Guard, the DNR, the MPCA, you know, the local communities. So anytime there is, climate is so expensive. For us, it isn't just something that a group of residents can pay for. It's not something just the city can pay for. It's not anyone's fault either. It's all of our faults and responsibility to come up with the best plan. So those are just some ideas that I have, Peter. I could probably get back to you with something more specific if you're looking for that, but that's kind of where I think we would start.
Thanks, Mayor Larson. We have a question from the Brainerd Dispatch regarding the Brainerd Lakes area, and have there been any weather-related incidents in that part of the state? And are there any sort of planning projects that these dollars could be used for? Katrina, I know you started talking a little bit about the wastewater treatment facility. I don't know if you want to dive in there. I know, Mark, too, you had some comments about weather-related incidents.
So Darren, this is Katrina, and I'll just be brief and say, you know, the Brainerd wastewater treatment plant is fairly new, and one of the models for how we see wastewater treatment around the state. But even there, they have had experiences where just they were inundated by rain, and you have a seal around a tank that just can't hold anymore, and you get extra stormwater or runoff into the seal. So it just shows you that you can build something fabulous and with the great, the best engineering standards, and then weather is going to find a way. So I think the answer is yes. And to what you've heard from other leaders on the call, each community will be best situated to figure out where they have the most the vulnerabilities and where their priorities lie. And in some instances, that may be wastewater treatment. In some instances, it may be the collection pipes that bring water to the wastewater treatment. In others, it may be stormwater retention, or it may be different types of green infrastructure that just help communities become more resilient, green roofs, rain gardens, or reconfiguring landscapes that bring aesthetic and recreational values as well as bring climate resilience.
And Darren, I'll just speak up here a little bit from the property insurance perspective, more from the consumer focus. The reporter asked about any significant weather events, and specifically in June of 2015, there was a very large hailstorm in the Brainerd Lakes area that cost about $250 million in insured losses. You know, from the consumer standpoint, an easy fix to that is simply buying hail-resistant shingles. They are available. They're a little bit more expensive than the regular shingles, but when you're rebuilding or doing some remodeling, if you're going to replace your roof, it's not a bad idea to consider spending a few percentage points more in the cost to be able to buy something that's more resilient. And in this case, you can buy hail-resistant shingles that can prevent future losses. So that's just one simple thing. Another thing would be to buy a battery backup for your sump pump. It's something simple, but a lot of insured losses are when there's a power outage and the sump pump backs up into somebody's basement and causes a loss. You can prevent that by simply buying and installing a battery backup sump pump. It's something that those little tips can save you, because if your insurance company knows that you're taking those steps, you will get a premium discount. So it's something to think about.
Thanks, Mark. We have a question from Kitty regarding for those smaller communities on the North Shore who may not have had an extreme weather event. How does the MPCA get its message out to them and get buy-in from those local leaders about these preventive planning measures? I don't know if Katrina or the commissioner, if you have thoughts on.
I'll start, and Katrina, you can add in if I miss anything, but certainly we want to get the word out to everybody. So first thing, we need the legislature to act on this so that we can establish this program. This is the first that we have done this where we allow for resources for planning. It's really important. And as Senator McKeown said, it's probably 20 years overdue. So we need to get started immediately. So once this is approved by the legislature, and we hope that it will be at the level that we've asked for, then we'll work to both get the message out through our different channels, whether they're listservs, our outreach. We have a whole division that's dedicated to municipalities within the MPCA. So there are already those relationships that are there. And so we do that, as well as work with the PFC or PFA, the Public Facilities Association, to be able to get word out how this could complement such funding and their readiness for funding.
Commissioner, I'll just join in. This is Katrina, Assistant Commissioner for the MPCA, and say that the smallest communities can benefit from this as well. We know that there are communities in parts of Minnesota that have no curb and gutter. They may still be thinking about developing asset plans overall, like where they have fire hydrants, where they have light posts, where they have stormwater infrastructure if it exists, or where that might intersect with other priorities that they have. And if they haven't started that work, this would help them jumpstart that type of work. We know that asset management planning is critical at the municipal level, and we see this as complementary to that. And I'll just note that there are some questions in the chat here about how much money this type of work costs and how many projects we might be able to fund with 2.9 million. And you've heard this described as a modest ask, and I would echo that and say we know that 2.9 million is not going to fill this gap or meet this need, but we are hopeful that this can start. Projects will be very locale specific, and planning for an entire medium-sized community can cost up to $300,000, but vulnerability assessments and asset management work can be cheaper than that in some instances, especially if you're focused on a smaller geographic area or scope. So we hope that we will be able to assist at least 15 communities with this amount of money, and maybe more depending on what types of proposals come in.
Great, thanks. Kendall, we have another question from you.
Yes, so in the funding proposal fact sheet that I read through, it said these grants are available to cities, communities, and tribal nations on a competitive basis. Who ultimately will determine which communities get funding and how much funding they receive?
I think, you know, we're still developing that process, which is what would happen after the funding, where we would, comes into place, where we would set up and get input on that guidance. But Katrina, do you want to talk a little bit about that process? This will be new to us as well, but we do issue competitive grants out of the agency quite often that we would model this after. And we have a environmental justice lens that we put on our grants as well. So I'll let Katrina talk a little bit to that.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And we would be building this new. And you have heard the commissioner mention equity and environmental justice, and that is an issue that we take very seriously in all of our work. And so I imagine that we will develop some criteria with our engineers as well as our small business and small community assistance experts within the agency, and then shop those around for people to give input, because I think we know that we don't have all the right answers or the best answers, and that our programs become stronger when we get input from others. So that is how we have done things in the recent past, and I expect that that is how this would work as well.
Great, thank you. I think we have addressed all of the questions in the chat. Is there any additional questions that folks may have, or a follow-up question?
There's so many great questions. So I just want to say a huge thanks. Oh, someone else has their hands up. I just want to say thanks to all the media that is here to cover this important event, and thank you for all the great questions. Darren?
Great. Senator, you wanted to say something.
Yeah, just really quick, you know, I was looking at the question about the North Shore and the small communities up on the North Shore. And, you know, one of the things that I would add is that up in northeastern Minnesota, over the course of my lifetime, we have seen our environment change in the Northeast. We have seen the change in the weather. People know what's happening around them, and they're looking to their leaders to lead and to actually do the work that we need to do to prepare for what's to come. So I think that actually the public largely is ready for this, and they have bought into this. And I would really encourage the public to contact your legislators, contact your House representatives, contact your state senators, let them know that you are paying attention and you're asking them to lead on climate crisis. You're asking them to help your local communities prepare for what's to come and to make the preparations that we're going to need to make. You know, we're never going back to 1992, you know, but we have legislators who are still operating at the Capitol as if it's still 1992. And it's time to move forward and time to sort of improve, to seize this crisis and to transform it into an opportunity to make our communities better. Now is the time to do that. So I do think, you know, to the members of the press here, I do think that our communities and the public is with us on this. They're asking for leadership. Some of the holdup is actually just sort of entrenched power bases that need to be dragged along. So I encourage people to contact their representatives on this.
Great. Thank you, Senator. Greatly appreciate the comments. With that, we will wrap up today's event. Again, thank you very much. If you have additional questions, feel free to either reach out to myself, Mary, or Lucy, and we will get you the appropriate information or line up the appropriate guest for you. So with that, thank you.